On today's Locked On Giants podcast, it's all about the Giants offense, key players, top questions, stats, and more coming your way next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, it's all about the New York Giants offense. So I wrote down several categories. We're going to talk about indispensable players, top questions, who's on the hot seat, battles, stats, predictions, all that good stuff. So I'm going to take you from A to Z, basically, focusing on the Giants offense. We'll do the offense today. We'll do the defense tomorrow to close out the week. So that's our schedule for today. Let's get right into it. All right. We're going to kick things off with indispensable players on offense. Now, this idea kind of came from a series that we do over on New York Giants on SI. We do the most indispensable series, most indispensable Giants. We do that every year. We take a vote amongst all of us over at New York Giants on SI, and we start with the honorable mentions and we count backwards, 7, 6, 5, 4, all the way up to number 1. This particular list is my list. All right. No vote taken. I'm only going to give you 3. And I'm going to tell you why they're most indispensable. I'm going to start off with number 3 on the list, and that is quarterback Russell Wilson. All right. Now, whether you love him or you hate him as a quarterback for this team, if Russell Wilson goes down, I suspect the Giants offense is going to be in trouble. Now, that's not meant to be disrespectful to Jameis Winston or Jackson Dart or, Tommy DeVito, if he should make the roster. It's just quite simply Russell Wilson, in my opinion, gives the Giants the best chance to win, especially in the beginning part of the season where, you're going to want to hit the ground running if you're the Giants, given that schedule. So Russell Wilson is the guy that, in my opinion, you just, if you lose him and you lose him, especially early on, then you're in trouble. All right. You might win a game or two with Jameis Winston, but you might also lose a few with him. And I just think Wilson gives them the best chance to win. All right. Number 2, Andrew Thomas, left tackle. Now, if this were last year, I probably would have put Andrew Thomas at the top of the list. I have him as number 2 because pound for pound, he is the best offensive lineman this team has. And it's not even close. All right. Now, the good news is the Giants, in recognizing that Thomas has developed something of being an injury-prone type of player, they brought in reinforcements, guys who can legitimately play tackle. Stone Forsythe, James Hudson III. And if you want to throw in the rookie Marcus Bowe, who's not really a left tackle, he's more of a right tackle. But if you needed to plug him in, say, at right tackle and move Jermaine Illuminor over, you have that option. So they do have depth there. And while, Andrew Thomas, like I said, is the best run blocker and the best pass protector that the Giants have on their starting offensive line, if he goes down, I don't know that there's going to be as big or as noticeable a drop-off as there has been the last couple of years when he has exited the lineup due to injury. So he is my second most indispensable Giant on offense. My first, Malik Nabers. I mean, come on. Is there any other choice here? Malik Nabers is the offense. And, you talk about a Giants offense that this year wants to air it out. They want to be more explosive. And, who's going to give them that best chance? Yep, Malik. So you lose Malik Nabers, and maybe Jalen Hyatt could step in. I don't know that he's got the same skill set as Malik Nabers. Malik Nabers is kind of a special, player, as we all have seen. But I think, losing him for any period of time can really hurt the Giants. So I'd hate to see that happen if, the football gods were to spring that on the Giants. All right, now let's move to the next topic, which is top questions for the Giants offense. All right. The first question I think we all have to ask is about the offensive line. Is it going to be better this year? Now, the starting five that opened up the season last year, Thomas, left guard John Runyon Jr., center John Michael Schmitz, right guard Greg Van Roten, and right tackle Jermaine Illuminor, wasn't that bad, right? Really, the offensive line started to come undone when the injuries started to hit the unit. So there was, obviously, like, I talked about it before, they added offensive tackles, depth, should there be an injury. The interior of the line, I think, is still a little iffy for me. I think Marcus Bowe can play inside, even though, they've got him working primarily at tackle, or at least that's the plan to start. But, giving you some stats here from last year, and this is from NFL Pro, by the way. The Giants ranked 16th in quarterback pressure rate with a 40% quarterback pressure rate. As a result, the quarterbacks had 3.23 time to throw time, which was ranked 6th, but they were pretty much getting the ball out of their hand quickly. So they weren't taking deep drops, 5 and 7-step drops. The deep passing game was non-existent. So that was all part of the issue there. So the offensive line, I think they'll be okay at the tackle spot. I feel a lot better about that. I don't feel as warm and fuzzy about the interior of the offensive line. They've got people to compete, and we'll talk about that coming up, obviously. But, I've got to see how that shakes out, because if they have to roll with Greg Van Roten at right guard, I wouldn't hate that, but you also would like to maybe start to see them move towards the future, because I don't know how much longer Van Roten's going to be able to, going to play with this team or be with this team beyond this year. He only has a 1-year contract. All right, next question. Who's going to call the plays? Now, in the rookie minicamp, Mike Kafka, the offensive coordinator, was on the radio. But it's possible that he was on the radio because Brian Dable, the head coach who called the plays last year, maybe he wanted to spend every moment with Jackson Dart, the quarterback, the rookie quarterback. So will Kafka still be on the radio this year? It is possible. All right. We will see what the Giants do in the OTAs, which start next Tuesday. Media is in on Wednesday. But even then, folks, I don't think you can say that, a decision's been made, because Dable might just say to Kafka, look, you call the plays all spring into the summer and let me work with Dart. And then Dable might decide to take it back, or maybe he says, you know what, I'll let you do it, Mike, since you did it all spring, all summer. So that's something, certainly that needs to be to be figured out by the Giants. All right, speaking of Dart, how quickly is he going to come along? Now, this is a kid who seems to have his head screwed on straight, who seems to know that, he's got to come in and he's got some things he's got to work on. And as I mentioned, the Giants are going to pour a lot of resources into his development. So how soon can he be ready? I've said that, he's going to start as quarterback 3, and will he advance to quarterback 2 by the end of the year, or maybe even the starter? It is possible. You can't rule it out, but I do think the plan is for him to sit for most of the year. The question is how quickly does he develop? Because again, I go back to Eli Manning. Eli Manning in 2004 was supposed to sit the entire year, but he progressed and was ready to go. More than halfway into the season, they made the switch, and the rest was history, as we know. All right, the last question on my list here. What about the receivers? Is the receiver group going to be better? Now, remember, the Giants didn't really add to this group as far as, like a guy who's going to be a mainstay in the offense. They brought back Darius Slayton to go with Malik Neighbors, to go with Wan'Dale Robinson. The receiver group last year wasn't horrible, but they could have been better. There were some drop passes, obviously. some questions with some routes, but it is hoped that the quarterback play will make a big difference for the receiver group, that they'll be able to, air things out, get more separation, not have to come back to the ball, not have to pause and hesitate for the quarterback to get the ball to them, which we saw a lot of times, last year. So the hope is that the receiving group does, look better overall. Now it's possible, like I said, that they add Gabe Davis later on if Davis is able to pass a physical and they're able to reach an agreement. But for the time being, they're going to run it back with the same three main guys, and then it's just a question of who fills in the rest of the group. All right, coming up next, we're going to take a look at stats that need to change and who's on the hot seat for the New York Giants offense. That's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, as a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means that when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. To post your job, use LinkedIn's new feature to help you write your job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip: add the hiring hashtag frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder why 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. So go on, post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. Again, that's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. We're talking about the Giants offense, all about the offense. And of course, on tomorrow's show, we'll do the defense to wrap things up for the week. And then we have OTAs, which start next week. So there's going to be football to talk about and some new developments and interviews and all that good stuff. So we'll have all that for you coming up next week here on the Locked On Giants podcast. So let's get back to our discussion of the Giants offense. We're just going down a bunch of categories here. And in this segment, we'll talk about stats that need to change from last year and who's on the hot seat. All right, let's start with the stats. The first one, the obvious one, is going to be deep passing. All right, the deep passing game last year was terrible. According to NFL Pro, the Giants averaged 21.4 average yards on deep passes going at least 20 air yards or more. All right. That was ranked 31st in the NFL amongst all the offenses. They only had 4 deep touchdowns of 20 plus air yards, ranked 27th. All right. Their EPA for per pass negative 0.21, 30th in the league. Now, the good news, they had 0 sacks on deep balls. Great. But you know what? They've got to improve the deep balls because they didn't connect on very many. And that's an element of the game that Brian Daboll kind of wants to develop. It's not going to turn into an offense that, is going to constantly be throwing the deep ball. But certainly, I think they want to get the deep ball more involved into the offensive game plan. It's really, they haven't been able to do that just yet. With Russell Wilson, they should be able to because the moon ball is Russell Wilson's specialty. Okay. One more stat that needs to change: rushing yards per play. Now, last year, the Giants averaged 4.2 rushing yards per play, 18th. Blame it on the offensive line if you want. I mean, the run blocking, I thought last year wasn't very good. But then again, you look at the construction of the Giants offensive line last year. Most of the guys that they brought in were better pass blockers than they were run blockers for some reason, which is kind of, weird to think about because, you think run blocking, you think going straight ahead, whereas pass blocking, you're retrieving into your set. But yet the Giants were slightly better at pass blocking, slightly being the key word, than they were at run blocking. So anyway, the Giants averaged 4.2 yards per rushing attempt, which was 18th in the league. Their EPA per rush attempt minus 0.09. The Giants have running backs who can do well. And if they're not averaging at least 5 yards or more per carry, that's not good. All right. Ideally, especially if you're running on first down, you want to pick up at least half the yardage you need, which, half of 10 is 5. Giants were barely getting, 4, which meant that second down was second and long, long yardage being anything over 5 yards. So that's something I think you want to see improve as far as stats go. All right, let's move on now to who is on the hot seat on the offensive side of the ball. And I think we got to start with Evan Neal, offensive lineman. All right, Evan Neal, last year been reporting this for the longest time now. Last year, the Giants had intended to convert him to guard. That did not work out because Neal had the setback with his foot. All right, so this year, they're moving full steam ahead with that plan to convert Evan Neal to guard to see if they can't salvage him. Because look, like I said before, Greg Van Roten, I don't think is a long-term answer at right guard. So the question becomes now, do you see if Evan Neal can play at a high enough level at right guard and maybe re-sign him? Do you move on from him? Do you put Marcus Bowe in there? Do you maybe save Marcus Bowe for right tackle? Because remember, Jermaine Oluminor's contract is coming up for renewal after this year. How does that right side of the offensive line shake out? That's a big question mark. And I think that question can begin to be answered by what happens with Evan Neal and his attempt to become an NFL quality guard. Now, he did it in college. He did it on the left side, did it fairly well. This is the NFL, a little bit different ball game here. So that's something to keep an eye on. Jalen Hyatt is on the hot seat. Now, it's kind of interesting because Jalen Hyatt, kid works hard. His biggest problems, and again, this is just my guess from what I've seen on film, his route running is not as polished as it should be. And his blocking, his downfield blocking, which is very much part of the game of a wide receiver's game, is basically not there. Darius Slayton, who beat Jalen Hyatt out last year for wide receiver 2, much better blocker. And it's not even close. All right. You've got to be physical. You've got to, have enough girth to kind of hold up downfield. It is an important part of a receiver's responsibilities. And Jalen Hyatt just not very good at that. And part of that is because his build, he's stick thin. Now he's been working to add bulk of muscle to his frame, get stronger. But, that's one part of the game that he obviously needs to improve on. The other one is obviously running routes, being where you're supposed to be where the quarterback expects you to be. And that's something that he's kind of been shaky on. And based on, the film, that's probably been one of the reasons why the Giants are, exploring a Gabe Davis or looking at these other receivers to maybe see if one of them can leapfrog ahead of Jalen Hyatt on the depth chart. The last guy that I think is kind of on the hot seat, but his seat is, I wouldn't say his seat is blazing hot. I would say maybe it's starting to warm up a little bit. Center John Michael Schmitz. Now, Schmitz is not bad, where you're sitting there and you're saying, oh my gosh, you've got to get him out of the lineup. But his game just lacks something. It just seems like his progression has come at a snail's pace, all right? He's not very physical or nimble, which is a problem. That's a very tough combination to overcome. His footwork is kind of clunky, so when he has to slide or mirror, it's clunky, for lack of a better term. And when he gets out to the second level, he just seems more content on sealing his guy off as opposed to hitting somebody. So you'd like to see a little bit more, like I said, physicality in the game. Last year, he made baby steps, and I get it. He had the injury the year before with the shoulder issue. He missed time last year because of an injury again, but you just would have liked to have seen Schmitz a little further along than I think where he was last year. Now, this is year 3 for him. Maybe he takes that big leap, but certainly that's something to keep an eye on moving forward because we're talking about a second-round draft pick. And again, not horrible. He's been serviceable, but I just feel like there's more to his game that needs to come out, and we haven't seen it just yet from him. Okay, coming up next, we're going to talk about battle to watch, the big battle to watch on offense. And then I've got a bold prediction for you. And this one's got me a little nervous because I don't like to make bold predictions, but I'm going to throw it out there and see what you guys and gals think. That's coming up right after this. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and we are all about the offense today. We've been going through various bullet points, topics about the offense. We're going to do the same thing tomorrow on the defense. We're going to have a lot to talk about then, as we have today. We've had a lot to talk about on the offense. So let's go ahead and finish this one out. Battle to watch. All right. Now, you could say easily the bottom of the receiver depth. That could be an interesting battle. You could say maybe tight end 3. Will it be Thomas Fidone? Will it be Greg Dulcich? Will it be somebody else? Giants, they added Fidone to the tight end group, which includes Theo Johnson, Daniel Bellinger, and Chris Manhurst. So will those 3 be the guys, or will one of them be, edged out? To me, the biggest battle to watch is going to be the offensive line, particularly that right guard spot. Greg Van Roten is the incumbent. All right. I would not hate it if he ended up being the starter, but I would really like to see one of these younger guys maybe step in there so that this line can maybe, start to gel with some younger continuity. Right now, the obvious argument against that is you put Greg Van Roten in there and you had the same starting offensive line that you had last year. So there's your continuity. But you got to think down the line as well. I know the coaches aren't going to think that way. They're going to say best available or best player, best 5, which is fine. That works too. But I'd like to see who of Joshua Zudu, who's entering the final year of his deal and is kind of on shaky ground, former 3rd-round pick. Marcus Bowe, does he move inside to guard? I think he's going to probably see some snaps there as well. And I mentioned Evan Neal before. Is he going to get some snaps there, and how's he going to look? You also have, Austin Schlottman was brought back. He can play either guard spot or center. So maybe he's in direct competition now with Van Roten, who could do both. Aaron Stinney, who's probably more of a left guard, but I think he could play some right guard if you need him to. So really, I just think solving the interior of the offensive line, particularly the right guard spot, and figuring out, what the depth chart is going to look there. I think that's probably going to be the biggest battle to keep an eye on this summer on the offensive side of the ball. And that includes, I didn't mention running back. I'm not really sure there's going to be that much of a battle there at running back. So, all right, one last point, bold prediction. Now, I had to think about this one, and I didn't think about it too long because this is kind of, I think, how it's going to go. And that is Jackson Dart will be in the starting lineup by week 16. Now, Jackson Dart, as you guys and gals know, I've been saying all along, the plan is to sit him. They want to sit him, let him work on his, footwork, let him work on his mechanics, make any adjustments that they need him to make based on, what he's bringing to the table right now. Let him acclimate, let him learn the playbook, let him start to feel comfortable as the future leader of the offense. So that will probably take up most of the season. If the Giants are not in the hunt for anything towards the end of the year, and Jackson Dart has shown, progress, which I think it's safe to say you could expect him to show some progress, Why not put him out there? I keep referring back to Eli Manning when he was a rookie. The plan then was for him to sit for the whole year. I know I covered him that year. All right. But he progressed. And if I remember correctly, when they made the switch from Kurt Warner to Eli Manning, the Giants were still technically in contention for a playoff berth. And they decided at that point, nope, we're going to turn this over to our future quarterback, and just let him run the offense and let him gain some big experience. I could see the Giants potentially moving Jackson Dart into the starting lineup. I said by week 16 because I think that's the game against, I think that's the Vikings game. But maybe they move him into the lineup after the bye. The Giants, remember, had the late bye week this year. Week 14 is their bye. So maybe we see him after that. But here's the caveat again. If the Giants are competing for the division title, I don't think they'll, I'd be surprised if they say, no, we're going to make a change just for making a change sake. So, bottom line, I think at some point we will see Dart as a starter down the, again, it'll be down the line. Unlike the situation with Eli back in 2004, Eli actually had a couple of mop-up duty roles in blowout losses. I don't think necessarily that's going to happen with Jackson Dart because remember, Jackson Dart will probably be the third quarterback, the emergency quarterback, at least for the time being. Now, for him to potentially have a chance to be a mop-up type of guy, they would have to maybe make, they would have to make Jameis Winston the emergency guy. So I'm kind of curious to see how that goes. And as a matter of fact, I kind of want to, as the season goes on, and I have this, in my notebook to ask Brian Dable, not that I think I'll get much of an answer, but, at what point do you balance putting the guy in there to get him some live experience? Because you just can't replicate live reps in practice, no matter how hard you try. The quarterback doesn't have to worry about getting hit or pressured or anything like that. And it's hard to replicate. So there has to be some kind of a balance to know, okay, this guy is ready to go in if we need him to, versus, let's just sit him for the rest of the year. So that's something I'll probably, try to get an answer later in the year once we see how things kind of progress. So, all right, Giant fans, that is going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. As always, thank you for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen today. For your second listen, be sure to check out the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this season. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, I will see you tomorrow. Don't forget, we're going to talk about the defense. Same format as today, all about the defense that's coming your way tomorrow. See you then.